Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending this demonstration of ArchivesSpace and an overview of ArchivesSpace member benefits. I'm Jessica Crouch, the Community Engagement Lead for ArchivesSpace, and I'm joined today by ArchivesSpace Lead Program Manager, Christine DeBello. This session is intended for people considering using ArchivesSpace. If you're already an ArchivesSpace user and hopefully member, this presentation will probably not offer any new information, but you're more than welcome to attend. I'll begin by giving a brief overview of the ArchivesSpace program before moving to a light demonstration of the application itself. After, I'll provide information about ArchivesSpace membership and the benefits of being a member, not just a user of ArchivesSpace. For this demo, we are using the latest version of ArchivesSpace, which is version 4.1.1. If you're using an earlier version of ArchivesSpace, some of the functionality you see today may not be available to you. We won't be able to troubleshoot issues with your own implementations of ArchivesSpace, and we'll be focusing this demonstration on using the ArchivesSpace staff user interface and lightly the public user interface. If you have a question or issue with your implementation, you can always email us at archivespacehome@lyrasis.org, and you'll see and hear that email address a lot throughout this demonstration. This session is being recorded, and all presentation slides and links will be made available with the recording. So, what is ArchivesSpace? ArchivesSpace is an open source content management system used by archivists in a variety of settings to manage and describe their collections and optionally make those collections publicly available through our public user interface. ArchivesSpace supports a range of functions performed in archives and special collections, including accessioning, arrangement, description, preservation, and access, and allows archivists to describe a variety of materials, including both physical items and digital objects, including born digital material. ArchivesSpace can also be used as a metadata authoring tool and supports both importing and exporting of data in a variety of formats. ArchivesSpace is the successor to two widely used open source applications, Archivist Toolkit and Archon. We know many archives continue to use these two systems, and we do have migration tools available on our website for those users looking to migrate to ArchivesSpace from those legacy systems. But we also know that users are migrating to ArchivesSpace from a variety of content management systems. In addition to standard and metadata specific imports available within the application, we maintain a number of migration tools and data maps that can help make migration into ArchivesSpace easier for those that are looking to migrate from another system. So in short, ArchivesSpace is developed by archivists, supported by diverse archival repositories, and fills a common need for archives around the world. While the ArchivesSpace application is free to download and use, ArchivesSpace is a nonprofit organization, and we have a membership model to support the development of the application and user community. Only organizations that are members of ArchivesSpace directly contribute to the sustainability of the application, and because of that support, members of ArchivesSpace are entitled to certain tangible benefits, and I'm going to get into those benefits after the demo. In addition to these benefits, members also serve on the various governance groups within ArchivesSpace, including our User Advisory Council, Technical Advisory Council, and our board. Members are also asked to participate in community discussions and polls about the future development of the application. And in this way, ArchivesSpace members work together to create and improve an archives management application reflecting our values as archivists. So this means ArchivesSpace is standards-driven, flexible and extensible, customizable and localizable, integrates with other applications people use to do their work, and promotes efficiency overall. And ArchivesSpace is and provides an opportunity. It's an opportunity for archivists to manage and make available as much of their archival material as possible, no matter their institutional setting. We have ArchivesSpace members working in large government archives and major academic institutions, as well as small community archives and volunteer-driven historical societies making use of the application. This is because ArchivesSpace promotes adoption of standards and develops shared best practices across all of these organizations and brings people from different sizes and types of institutions together to solve common problems that we all share. ArchivesSpace also provides the opportunity to take all of your work, all this archival description, and make it available to users via a public user interface, which we're going to see a little bit later. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move over to the ArchivesSpace application and begin the demo portion of this demonstration. All right. So you should all now be seeing ArchivesSpace. This is the ArchivesSpace staff user interface. Someone tell me if that is not what you were seeing. In this demonstration, I'm going to spend most of our time exploring the ArchivesSpace staff user interface. That's what we're seeing right now. This is where archivists and those working to describe material will also be spending most of their time. After, I'm going to move to the ArchivesSpace public user interface to briefly show what that looks like for researchers and patrons, but we will spend most of our time in the staff user interface. Before I dive into the demo, I want to mention that all of the examples that you're going to see today are real collections held by ArchivesSpace member organizations. These organizations made their metadata available to the program for the purposes of education and training, and in the interest of creating a more diverse set of example data for users. So we're very grateful to these organizations for their willingness to let us use their data in this way. Okay, so this is ArchivesSpace. This is the ArchivesSpace staff user interface. I've already logged in. You would be prompted to log in if you were using ArchivesSpace. I've already done that part. And this is the staff user interface that you would be greeted with. I'm going to minimize some screens. So Christine, if anything pops up, if you could let me know. Looking at it, it looks pretty simple, but actually from here you can invoke most of the functions or all of the functions that you need to use ArchivesSpace. I'm going to break it down into 4 separate sections and talk about it that way before I get into some specific record types that you can create in the application. So the first area I'm going to talk about is just right up here. This is really where things related to repository and application management happen. I will mention, and I will say this multiple times throughout this demo, that what you see here and throughout the application is dependent on your user permissions. So for the purposes of this demo, I have administrative permissions and we can see everything. However, if you are, you have staff that you don't want necessarily to be able to have all of the functions within the application, you can manage different user permissions and groups, and I'll show you where to do that in just a second, and get pretty granular with those permissions. So not everything that you see here today is something that every single user in your application would be able to do if you don't want them to do it. But here, everything here is really about high-level repository and application functions, like I said. The first option here is where you can select a repository. So this is only used if you are an organization that has multiple repositories within your ArchivesSpace application. If you're an organization that doesn't have multiple repositories, you just have your archive and you don't need to have multiple repositories within your ArchivesSpace, that's perfectly fine and perfectly normal. You wouldn't need to navigate between multiple repositories. But if you're at a large organization like a university and you have multiple special collections and archives departments across campus and everyone wants to have their own repository within ArchivesSpace to manage their individual data, but you do all want to share one ArchivesSpace implementation for shared discovery and access and linking related collections through subject headings and that sort of thing, then you're going to want to have multiple repositories. Repositories can be navigated to by going to select repository, hitting the dropdown, and you're given the abbreviations that when you create a repository, you determine to see how many repositories you have in the application and navigate to the repository you want to navigate into. Again, this is dependent on permission. If you have a staff member that only works in one repository, they only need access to the one repository, they will not have this option. But if you're an administrator who needs to move between repositories, you would have this option. Just always be mindful that you are aware of which repository you are in, because if you're creating a record or making changes to records, or even searching and browsing within the staff user interface, the results that you see will be for that specific repository. So you don't want to go into the wrong repository, create a collection, because then you'd have to transfer it. It would be a whole hassle. So just be aware of what repository you're in. Also up here, you have high-level sort of system-specific controls that you can invoke. I'm not going to have time to get into all of these, but this is where you could go to do things like manage your control value list. Those are your drop downs that you see throughout the application. Things like your container profiles and location profiles. We definitely don't have time to get into that today. And do other things like manage your repositories, your OAI PMH settings. You can manage users and see system information. Again, this is all very dependent on permissions. Not everyone at your organization would need to be able to do all of this really high level stuff, and you wouldn't want them to. But if you have the correct permissions, you can see all of this. If you do not have the permissions to see this, so if you're someone that can't do any of this, the only option that user would see when they hit the system drop down is the ability to go to the ArchivesSpace Help Center. So they would just see that. If they click that link, it would take them out to the ArchivesSpace Help Center, obviously. Our Help Center is a benefit of membership to ArchivesSpace. It contains our user manual, user tutorial videos, and recordings of all of our past trainings. So it's a really helpful resource. I'll bring it up a couple other times throughout this demo, but that's one easy way to get to the Help Center if you need to, and would be available to any user regardless of permissions. The last option is up here. You can see this is what you're logged in as. I'm logged in as an administrator account. It's just admin, not very original, but that it tells you who you are and who you're logged in as. And then if you have the permissions, you can manage different preferences. And if you have administrator privileges, you can become another user. This is really handy if someone is like, I'm just not seeing what you're seeing, or this application is not behaving for me the way that it's behaving for you. You can go in and check out what they've got going on. You can also manage your own user account and log out. Preference management, again, not a ton of time to get into that, but just keep in mind that you can manage preferences at a variety of levels. So global preferences, that would be an administrator setting a preference for the entire ArchivesSpace application, determining that the default language for the application would display, or that sort of thing, managing the order that notes would display, how search and browse columns would display at a very high level. It would impact everyone. Repository preferences, but at the repository level, it would only impact repository specific users, not the entire global application. And then default preferences would be for the specific user. So if a specific user wanted to interact with the application in a language that was different than the default preference, they could do that for themselves. The important thing to keep in mind is that preferences sort of default to the lowest level of setting. So if a user sets a preference, that is what they see. So if an administrator has gone in and set a global preference, and then a user says, I'm not seeing that, they may have changed their own preferences, and that may be what the issue is. But you can get pretty specific with your preferences there. Directly below that area, we have another little set of drop downs. This tells you what repository you're in, so you can click that to get repository information. And then there's a gear menu that you can drop down and see a whole bunch of other options. So these are, again, fairly high level, maybe not things you're going to do every day, but it's specific to things like user permissions and background jobs and reports. Again, dependent on permissions, a user here could go to do things like manage user access for other accounts, manage user groups. That's how you set permissions. You create individual user groups with specific permissions within those groups and then assign people to the groups. You could also do things like manage assessment attributes and top containers. We're not going to have time to get into assessments or container management today, but that is something that you can do there. Not something everyone's going to do, but someone will need to do. You also have the ability to transfer a repository. That's something that you will hopefully never have to do, but you may have to transfer a repository, again, dependent on permission. And then the options to run background jobs and reports. So background jobs can be anything from importing and exporting data or generating PDF. There are many different types of background jobs that you can invoke within ArchivesSpace. You can do that in two places. This is one of them. I'll show you the other in just a second. But also really handy, and I hope everyone's paying attention to this. If you want to use bulk import templates, so if you're trying to migrate your data into ArchivesSpace and you need spreadsheets to do that have been mapped to ArchivesSpace, we have our bulk import templates here. So you click the bulk import template option, it takes you to the list of all of the spreadsheet templates that we have available. You download the appropriate template for your needs, put your data in it, and then re-import it into ArchivesSpace. This is very handy. The spreadsheet templates themselves are really great, and then the ability to be able to download them from directly within the application is super handy too. So I just wanted to point that out. And then below that, you have the ability to run reports. We have some just canned reports in ArchivesSpace that you can run, and then you also have the ability to create some custom report templates, save those, and then you can run your reports according to your needs that way. So report functionalities there as well. And then lastly, if you have any plugins in the application, so if you've added any plugins to your application, you can invoke those there. ArchivesSpace does come with one plugin out of the box, and that's the Library of Congress Name Authority File Import plugin to help you with your subject and agent imports if you're making use of the Library of Congress Name Authority file. Okay, so that is the right side of the application. Let's move over to the left. This is sort of where you're going to spend most of your time, I would anticipate. This is where you can go to create and find records, right? So I'm going to show you a little bit about how search and browse works in just a moment. But first, I'm going to talk about creating records. To create a record, you would hit create. There are multiple places where you can go to create records actually within ArchivesSpace, but the easiest, of course, would just be to go to create dropdown, and you get your options for all of the different record types that you can create in ArchivesSpace. Of course, you can do many other things in ArchivesSpace, like run reports, run background jobs like we talked about, but these are the record types that you can create within the application itself. You see that there are a variety of records that you can create. I'm not going to have time to get into every record type today. I just wanted to point out that if you see on this dropdown, there's like this little line right here. The 3 record types that you see above that line, accessions, resources, and digital objects, they're known collectively as material description records. These are the records that are about your materials. So these are the accession record for when the material comes in, your resource record, which is your catalog record or your finding aid, and then digital object records for digital materials. So they're describing the materials themselves. All of the record types that you see below that line are meant to amplify your material description record. So if you want to link related subject and agent records within ArchivesSpace, obviously you're going to be creating those with the intention of linking them to a related resource record, a related digital object record, a related accession record. Same thing with locations, or right, you need stuff to put in the location. So you would create a location, either a single location, or you can create batch locations and then assign your material to that location. You could do things like create events to say, oh, this collection is processed, it's now available, or assessments if you're assessing your material. Again, all of these things are intended to amplify the description of the materials that you have. And then finally, this is the other area where you can run background jobs, and you can see all of the different types of background jobs that you can run. And then finally, you have the ability to either search or browse for your collections from the staff user interface here. I'm going to be using browse to navigate to some records in just a second to show you what records look like. I'm going to show you specifically, I'm going to show you what accession, resource, and digital object records look like. I'm not going to have time to get into other record types, but you're welcome to ask questions in the Q&A. But here is what search looks like. Very standard, right? Like that's just a basic keyword search that we all know. But you also have the option to create advanced searches by hitting this little caret and dropping down. From there, you have the ability to build out a search pretty granularly. These advanced search fields can be used in combination together, but you do have to have it connected through a Boolean operator. We have and, or not. And is the default. You can get really specific about what field you're searching for your text. You can also, get selective about dates when they were created or when records were updated. So if you're looking for a very specific record, you're having trouble locating it, you can always use this advanced search to find it. We'll go ahead and close that. Okay, perfect. And then also, of course, you have the ability to browse. So you've already created and saved the record. You're just trying to find it. You do have browse options. And you can see it's the same record types that we see in the create dropdown. These just are records that have already been created. I'm going to show you what an accession record, a resource record, a digital object record looks like now. Like I said, sorry. And I'm going to do this a little bit differently than how I normally do demos. So let's see how it goes. Normally, I start by showing you what an accession record looks like, but I'm actually going to start by showing you a resource record today. I decided to try it that way because that really is where the bulk of your archival description is going. And it's a little bit, the record template itself has a little bit more going on. So I wanted to start there and then work back to accessions, which is not how archivists are supposed to work, of course. But just I wanted to make sure we had plenty of time to talk about resources. So if you want to browse for collections that already exist, you can do that by going to the browse dropdown and selecting the record type that you would like to browse. I'm going to start by browsing resources. Oh, it logged me out. All right, well, that was what a login screen looks like. Go to resources. And then when you browse resources, you're provided with a list of all of the resources that have been created. And I will point out again, these are the resources that are available within the repository I am in. So when working in the staff user interface, you're only seeing results for the repository that you are working in. That's not true for the public user interface. That displays results for all of your published collections, regardless of the repository. But when you're in the staff user interface, you are working within a specific repository. So from here, we can see all of the resource records that have already been created for this repository. I know what I'm looking for, so I'm going to select it. But if you weren't entirely sure, You could always filter by text. I know one word in the title of this resource record, and I could look it up, and you could filter by text that way. Or if you're looking for something more general, you can use the faceted search on the left-hand side, which you can see all of the different subject headings here, as well as a few other different facets that you can make available to sort of limit your search if you're looking for something a little more broadly. And I'll also point out, I did mention that there's a way to create records from more than just by going to the create dropdown from within the browse menu. If you can always hit create. That's if you're like, oh wow, I guess I didn't create that record yet. You can always hit create and create a new record there. I'm going to show you two different resources today when we dive in. But before we do that, I just wanted to show you what a blank record template looks like. So let's go to create resource. So the few reasons I wanted to show you what it looked like before I showed you a finished, pull the chicken out of the oven like Julia Childs. Here's the finished resource record. Before I did that, I wanted to show you what a blank resource record looked like. And this is what essentially any new record type is going to look like, a bunch of blank fields for you to supply information into. You will notice that as I'm scrolling, there are many different sub-records within this record that you need to supply information for to be able to save your record. ArchivesSpace is obviously built on a number of standards, and then also has some specific needs within the application itself. So anywhere that you see a red asterisk, that means that is a required field. You need to put information there to be able to save it. If you don't, you'll get an error message. But you notice that there are red asterisks throughout the application. If you're ever wondering, why is this here? Why do I need to put information here? Or even, what does this field do? You can always scroll over the label itself, and you'll be provided with a tooltip. So I did want to highlight that these tooltips are available. Here, they'll tell you why it's required, like it'll reference the standard for why this is required, and they give you some examples of data that you could put there. These can be completely modified, these rollover tooltips. So you can integrate your own processes and procedures in, or reference different standards if you want to within the application. So I did want to point out that these tooltips are available. Another helpful, handy thing I wanted to point out before we move to a record is, as I'm scrolling, you may also be noticing there's just these little question marks all over the place. So anywhere that you see one of these question marks, these are content-sensitive help links. So I mentioned earlier that the resource manual, you can get to that by going to the system dropdown and getting it there. But other ways that you can access the user manual is anywhere you see one of these little question marks. If you click that question mark, it will take you to the specific page in the user manual that relates to that content. So if I'm creating my first resource record and I don't even know how to start, I can go over here and get some help on basic information for a resource record. So I just wanted to point out that those are available. So this is a resource record. Like I said, you do have to include all of this required information, but there's probably much more that you would want to you would want to include as you're building out this finding aid. This is a very high level, single level resource. You supply all of the information, save it, and then you're given the option to build out the hierarchy. So if your finding aid or your catalog has hierarchy to it, of course, you're going to want to be able to add that. But to start, you're basically adding the basic information, the high level, top level information for your resource. And once that's saved, then you have the option to do so much more. So let's go ahead and give it a look to see what that more is. I'm going to hit resources, browse resources. The first resource that I want to show you, that I'm going to look at this diary, and I'm going to select it in edit mode. You can always just hit view if you're not interested in editing, but my default is always to open in edit mode because you never know when you might find like a little typo or something. So this is a resource record that has been created and saved within the application itself. Now there are many more options available to me, the things that I can do to this record. This is a top single level resource record, and I'm going to talk about what that means in just a minute. But I guess first, let me tell you, define what a resource record is, because I'm saying resource record a lot, but you're probably thinking finding a catalog record. That's what you're thinking in your head. Within the context of ArchivesSpace, resources can be defined as material that are in the custody of your repository and are being controlled according to archival principles. A resource can be a whole collection, or it can be a single item. In this case, it's a single item. I'm going to show you a whole collection in just a second. And it's identified by an identifier and a title. Resource records are where you're going to place the bulk of your information about intellectual and physical characteristics of your material. And within a given resource record, you can add a range of descriptive elements as well as notes, right statements, dates, extents. And resource records can be supplemented with certain context and by linked related records like accession records, digital object records, subject headings. And then you can always link your related collections together. The resource record module is where you just build out your finding aid, essentially your catalog record. And then you can export out that finding aid in a variety of formats, including EAD, MarkXML, and a PDF. So that what we're looking at here is the ability to essentially do all of that. We've already saved the top level information about this collection, which in this instance is a diary. So this is a single level record. There really is no need to build out hierarchy here. I'm just describing this diary. And I have, not I, the holders of this diary have already filled out all of the necessary information, including supplying quite a few notes, linking related subjects and agents, all of those things that I just mentioned in addition to the required material. You can also export, as I mentioned, this resource record in a variety of formats. I'm going to scroll down and show you sort of what this completed record looks like very briefly, but you also notice on the left, you do have the ability to navigate. So if I was thinking, oh, I just need to update a note really quickly, I could hit notes and it would drop me right down to the notes. I'm not going to do that because that would be maybe just a little too quick. But I'm going to scroll down and just give you a sense of what this looks like. You see that there are repeatable fields here. So if you have multiple date types within the collection, you can include that. You can, here it's one diary, but you can include multiple extents if you need to do that. Finding a data field. I'm going to go a little faster now. You see we do have linked related agents. So these are people, families, corporate bodies. So this is the creator of the diary. She has her own agent record already. Anywhere you see that sort of dark blue in the application, that means that's a different record. So if you want to go and view the agent record specific to Emma, you could click that and go to view, and you'd be opening up an agent record. So you'd be in and manipulating a different record. So it just lets you know, hey, there is a record for her. Here it is. And then you notice there's this like light blue for the subjects in the notes. It says that there are 6 subjects and there are 12 notes. Anytime there's more than 5 of something in the application, it automatically just collapses it just to help with performance of the system. To see them, all you have to do is click it and they'll open right up. Do you see the 6 related subject headings that have been linked here? Again, that dark blue means that these are subject records that you go in and look at, manipulate, and view what other collections are linked to it. We have 12 notes. So you see the different note types? There are 26 different note types you can include in ArchivesSpace, including a general note, and you can move them around according to how you'd like them to display. This is also where you can include information about the instance of the material, and I know that's location management and container management can get a little bit in your head about it. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but this is just basically where you can say, all right, this diary is in a box and that box is on this shelf. And that's where you would do that. So this is a single level resource record. I'm going to scroll fast now. Let me show you very briefly looking at time, what a multi-level resource record looks like. So I'm going to look at the Krispy Kreme Corporation records. Again, I'm opening it in edit mode. It looks very similar to what we just saw, except now there is hierarchy involved. This is a hierarchical record, and you can view that hierarchy here. In this section, I expanded it, and you can follow the carets to open it up to see your different series. There's files within that series. I'm going to collapse that. Here we have a series that has sub-series, which I can then open up and see the files within that sub-series. All of these records are already saved within the application itself. And from here, if I think, oh gosh, I need to make an update to this record, you click it, and you see now we no longer are seeing the Krispy Kreme corporate records. We're seeing that specific file. And any changes you needed to make, you can make there. You can create this hierarchy by very singularly going in and adding children, so adding files, adding series, adding subseries, or adding siblings, so adding a series after a series. Or you could do things like using our spreadsheet templates to load the data that way. And then we also have a rapid data entry tool you can make use of. All right, so that is resource records. I'm going to go ahead and very briefly show you what an accession record looks like. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. This is the Krispy Kreme corporate records accession record, though. I just wanted to show you that you do have the ability to create accession records in maybe your normal work process. You'd be creating the accession record first, right? And once you've done that, so you can see here all this information that's been provided in this accession record, you do have the ability within accession records to use what we call spawning functionality to then spawn a pre-populated resource record or an accession record. Like if you have an accrual that comes in, you need to create a new accession record, or an archival object. So if you get an accrual to this collection came in and I needed to add it as a series, I could do that as an archival object. So that way you're not having to duplicate so much of your work to then go in and create the resource record after you created this accession record. The other thing I wanted to point out about accession records is way fewer things are required. So just be mindful of that and include the information you need to include and don't include what you don't need to include. So that is an accession record. You're essentially trying to store information about the receipt of the materials here, and then move on to processing it. You would do that by creating a resource. All right, looking at time. All right, I want to very quickly show you digital objects. I'm looking at time. So before I look at the digital object records, I want to point out a couple things about digital objects. ArchivesSpace is not a digital asset management system. You cannot ingest or store digital materials into ArchivesSpace. That's not what we're talking about. ArchivesSpace supports the management of digital object metadata, allowing you to manage description of your archival holdings within a single system. The assumption is that the files themselves will be stored and managed in a network or web accessible location, like a file server or a digital asset management system that's capable of managing those files, and then you link them back to ArchivesSpace. I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. Digital object metadata from within ArchivesSpace can be exported as METs, mods, or Dublin core. Sorry. And then digital object records can also be linked to related accession and resource records. So if this is actually a scan of a material that you hold, like a letter, you can always link the digital object, that scan, to the letter from within your resource record. You can describe digital objects within ArchivesSpace two ways. I'm going to show you both ways very quickly. And it does look very similar to what I just talked about by having like a single level resource record and a hierarchical resource record. You can describe your materials as simple digital objects or complex digital objects. So I'm just going to, I know this is going to be a simple digital object, so I'm going to open this in edit mode. And it's not. Wow. We'll try this one. All right, simple digital object. I'll have to remember that for next time. Okay, so I don't want to look at this one either. That's the one I wanted to look at. All right, so this is a simple digital object that has the information that I wanted us to look at. So digital objects in ArchivesSpace can be constructed as simple or complex. A simple digital object is one in which the intellectual content is contained in one digital content file. That's what we're looking at here. A complex digital object is one in which the intellectual content is distributed over two or more digital files. So a complex digital object is multi-level in structure, and I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a second. How you manage your digital objects is entirely up to you, and neither way is wrong. But let me just give you an example of what I mean by simple or complex. So that diary that we just looked at, if you wanted to digitize that diary and let's say it's a 100-page diary, you scanned all 100 pages and you made all 100 of those pages available as a single PDF. So it was a PDF with 100 pages in it. You would link that PDF in ArchivesSpace as a simple digital object because it's one digital file. And the way you would make that digital file available is through the file version section of a digital object record. So you can see here, this is a photograph. It's linked back directly to the file the viewer at the Smithsonian, that's where this collection comes from, where you'd be able to see this single photograph. But if it were the diary with the PDF, you would see the PDF file here, one single file. So that's a simple digital object. A complex digital object is one in which there are multiple files. So in this example, that diary, it's 100 pages. Let's say instead of having a 100-page PDF, you decided to make each individual scan its own JPEG. Now you have 100 JPEGs that you need to describe and make 100 different digital files available. So let's move back over to digital objects. And let's look at this example from before. So you would do that by creating a complex digital object, which is what you see here. So very similar to a resource record, you have that top level information where you describe the collection or the item as a whole, and then you would build out a hierarchy. Let's open this for each individual file, describing each individual file. So it could be the top level information is the name of the diary, and then under it you have 100 children essentially that are page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5. And each individual file will be linked here. So both ways are correct. It would just be up to you to decide how you would want to express your digital objects, either as simple or complex. And I'm going to move back up to the top level. And another thing to keep in mind when you're making decisions like that is what exactly do you want to get out of the system? So if you're looking to export digital object metadata like METS, mods, or Dublin Core, like you can do here, maybe building out complex digital objects is the right call. But if you're more interested in linking your digital materials back to your related resource or session records, then maybe simple digital objects are the right call because you're more interested in exporting out something like EAD. So big conversations around digital objects that I don't have time to get into, but I wanted to highlight those few things about digital objects and let you know that you can control your digital object metadata from within ArchivesSpace, though it is not a digital asset management system. We're not storing any digital files here. So those are digital objects. So looking at time, I'm very briefly going to show you what the ArchivesSpace public user interface looks like. I scrolled down to the bottom of this, this digital object because you can always get to the public user interface just by scrolling to the bottom and clicking View Public Interface. So that's what I'm going to do. All right, so this is the ArchivesSpace public user interface. It's pretty plain, but just know that you can customize it. So, and you're going to want to customize it, right? You're going to want to include your own logo. You're going to want to make sure it has your own colors. People can get really robust about their customizations. We have a page on our website called Who's Using ArchivesSpace. Anywhere you see a hyperlink there, that is someone's public user interface you can look at. You can really customize this to whatever degree that you really are able. The ArchivesSpace includes a public interface, which publishes the archival description that is entered into the staff interface, but it's only that material that you elect to publish. Nothing automatically publishes here. Use of the public interface is optional. Instead of using the public interface, some repositories export their metadata outputs like I showed you, or export out a PDF and put it on their website or use it in other systems. Or there are other front ends that people use with ArchivesSpace, but the public user interface is available, totally optional though. Like I said, this is the default homepage. It has no customizations. You will want to make your own customizations, and your sysadmin or hosting provider can do that for you. Some organizations make bigger customizations, like they make plugins and things that will add like a image slide and things like that. One of the great things about our community is that people frequently share those sorts of tools. So you can always go to that Who's Using ArchivesSpace page that I mentioned, or if you're an ArchivesSpace member, reach out on the listserv and say, hey, we're thinking about doing this. Has anyone else done it? You'd be surprised. I'm not going to do a deep dive in the PUI like I did for the staff user interface. But I do want to say a few things, and then I'll just show you again how the search works here. ArchivesSpace automatically indexes all the information you put into the system. So when you save your information in ArchivesSpace, it's automatically available for you there. It does not automatically publish to the public user interface, like I said, though. Throughout the application on the staff user interface, you'll see the publish checkbox throughout the different record types, and then there are the options within a resource record to actually publish all, but you want to be careful about that. Be sure you really do mean to publish all. It also, the public user interface also allows you to browse and sort records from a variety of parameters from within all of your repositories, like I mentioned. So you can build this very similarly to the staff user interface, like I just said, or like I just showed you. You can add an advanced search, linking things through Boolean operators, same search fields, very similar search, but the results you're going to get here are going to be for all repositories within your application, not just within the application that you're working in. Go ahead and remove these. You also have the ability to browse a variety of different options within the public user interface. And again, these are very customizable and controllable. Like unprocessed materials means the session records. I know many organizations suppress that entirely. They don't want people searching their session records. Or maybe you don't want to call repositories. You might want to call it, I don't know, libraries or something like that. You can always change all of this. but you do have the ability to browse within specific repositories. This is great for a researcher that knows they're going one place and they can only go to one location, and they can be sort of picky that way. You also have the ability to browse collections. And this is what the browse screen looks like from within the staff user interface. It gives you information about the collection itself, which is really great for researchers. And then they have the ability to use the filters that we saw earlier, as well as filtering by text and also narrowing by year, which is great for a researcher, like a college student who has to be doing a report within a specific time frame, and that's just how it's searching. You also have the ability to view digital materials, link subjects, again, great for a researcher that's interested in a specific topic, and names, which are agents, people, families, corporate bodies, and then classifications, which are record groupings, which we don't have time to get into today, but that's something that you can determine for yourself. Go back home. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move back to the slides now and talk about membership. I do see we have questions in the chat, so I'm going to try to move quickly. As I mentioned before, while the ArchivesSpace application is free to download and use, ArchivesSpace has a membership model to support the development of the application and user community. Since ArchivesSpace members directly contribute to the sustainability of the application, they're entitled to certain benefits in addition to the ability to serve on governance councils and provide input on development of the application. A little bit of background about our membership. We currently have over 500 ArchivesSpace member organizations, and membership is at the organizational level. So all employees within an organization are entitled to all benefits, regardless of size or how much staff you have. Membership is distributed across 5 levels with corresponding fees. Membership levels range from very small, which is a $300 a year membership fee, to very large, which is a $7,500 a year membership fee. Membership levels are intended to reflect organizational size and capacity. So all members are entitled to the same benefits regardless of size. It doesn't matter if you're small or very large, you get the same benefits. In addition to these membership levels, we also have other types of membership and affiliations for organizations that work with ArchivesSpace outside of normal archival work. I'm not going to get into those today, but I did see that there are a few people from different types of organizations in the demo today. So if that's something that we need to talk about, I'd be happy to do it. And I'm also going to be providing a series of links at the end of this presentation, which has tons of information. So what are these benefits I keep talking about? ArchivesSpace member benefits include access to the Help Center, like I mentioned before. So our user manual, user tutorial videos, recordings of past trainings. You also receive discounts on trainings. So we offer live trainings to our community throughout the year. Members receive those at a substantial discount. You also get technical support of the application. So if you need help installing it the first time or doing an upgrade, or you're getting some kind of an error, we can provide tech support for that. You also get access to member-only events and programs like the ArchivesSpace member forums that we hold in person and virtually every year, and ArchivesSpace member match program, which is like a peer-to-peer support program. You also get access to member-only listservs. That's what I mentioned about if you're ever thinking about doing a customization or something. The listserv is a great place to get conversation going. It's where our members communicate with one another, and it's also where we broadcast really important news and announcements. You also get the ability to collaborate with archivists around the world and to help guide the development of this application and the member community. And finally, before we move to the Q&A, here are all those links that I promised, and these slides are going to be included with the recording. So we've got a lot of stuff for your reference as you explore ArchivesSpace. You can find these things on our website. Our Getting Started page is a great place to get started. If you're learning more about ArchivesSpace for the first time, from there, you can do things like learn how to download the application. You can find a sandbox there, which is an open play space that you can try out the application without having to download anything. Just don't put anything in there you don't want other people to see or that you want to keep. You also can learn more about our membership benefits, fees, and levels on our website. So you can see where you would fall within those corresponding fees and levels that I mentioned before. If you decide ArchivesSpace membership is right for you and you just need a little bit of help convincing your supervisor or whoever makes those decisions to move forward with membership, we do have a Making a Case for ArchivesSpace membership page that highlights like talking points depending on who your audience is. And then a link to that Who's Using ArchivesSpace page, like I said, so you can see who's using ArchivesSpace around the world. And if there's a hyperlink on their name, you can see what their public user interface looks like. And then lastly, like I said, if you have any other questions, please feel free to email us. That is our email address at the bottom of this page. So I'm going to go ahead and pause there and see what is happening in the Q&A. All right. All right, Larissa asks, is ArchivesSpace able to manage conservation? For example, recording that an item has had a conservation treatment or has been removed for a conservation assessment. So ArchivesSpace does have an assessment module, so you can include like assessments of materials there. It also has an events module, an events record type, so you could include an event that something has gone out for conservation or that conservation has occurred. Um, it isn't necessarily intended to be, I would say play around with it, depending on your needs. So you definitely can track all of that information there, but it isn't a place where you could upload files related to that material or really track it at a granular level. It's kind of recording that these actions have happened. So I would encourage you to look at the sandbox and play around with it, and see if it's the right tool for your needs. If you're looking for more of like a museum management sort of application, it may not be the best option for you. But yes, you definitely can do all of that. You can track that the conservation's happened. You can you can include assessments of the application within the application. That was application a lot. Larissa, is there a template for importing authority files for place name, et cetera, if you don't use Library of Congress name authorities? So it is possible. We do have a spreadsheet template for importing subject headings. And there are a bunch of like handy workarounds for importing subject headings and names in bulk using our templates. And I do know that within the community, there is there is current development on a Wikidata plugin that would allow people who use Wikidata to include that information there. And there is the ability for for subject records to include the source of the information. You do not have to use Library of Congress name authorities to make use of the subject and agents. You can define your thesaurus however you'd like. The Library of Congress name authority plugin does come out of the box, but there are many other ways to get that information into ArchivesSpace, and you do not have to use Library of Congress specifically. My Wi-Fi cut out while we were covering digital objects, so apologies if this has already been covered. Are you able to attach photographs of items to their files? ArchivesSpace isn't a digital asset management system, so you can't store the photographs, the digital files, but you can link out to them using the file URI field. If you missed that part, I would recommend watching it again. But that is where you would link out to where that digital file lives and the information is stored there. It is possible to display a photograph within ArchivesSpace as sort of a thumbnail or a preview. We call it make representative functionality. It's don't have time to get into that today. It is not actually storing the file itself, though. It's pulling from wherever you are storing the file, and it's just giving a preview essentially of that item. And for that to work, you do need to be using a specific file type within the application. The file either needs to be JPEG, PNG, or TIFF for that to display. Otherwise, it will just display like a little generic icon. But yes, it is possible to link photographs in that way. What digital preservation systems can ArchivesSpace integrate with? That's a good question. ArchivesSpace has an open API, so in theory, it can integrate with anything. I know that there are systems that our users have already integrated with, things like Preservica. If there's a specific system you're thinking of, we can talk about that. And there are also integrations that exist that we don't know about because ArchivesSpace is an open source application that's free to use. So people are integrating with systems in a variety of ways. This would be a great question for something like our user group listserv as well to see how people are using it. We have a series on our website, a webinar series called Integrations with ArchivesSpace. It's also worth checking out. If you go to the webinar section of our website, there are presentations from different applications that integrate with ArchivesSpace about how those integrations work. So what systems it integrates with sort of depends, and it could be anything. Could you speak a little bit more about hosting options? Okay. So the ArchivesSpace program, which is me and Christine and all of us, we do not host the application ourselves. So this is a good question. You can download the application locally at any time. So if you have the ability at your organization and the IT support at your organization to host the application locally, you can do that. Many organizations do, but of course, not everyone has that option. So we do have two registered service providers that provide hosting for ArchivesSpace. Those providers are Lyrasis and Atlas Systems. You can find this on our website. If you go and find our registered service provider section, you can find links to both of those, both Lyrasis and Atlas Systems, and reach out directly to them for information about hosting. They can give you a quote. I will mention that both Lyrasis and Atlas Systems give discounts to ArchivesSpace members on their hosting packages worth looking out for. Another low-cost option that some organizations use is Library Host, all one word. So give that one a look as well. But there are also, depending on where you live, there may be a consortium that offers hosting. There may be a larger university that offers hosting. So it's worth also reaching out to your regionally specific connections to see who people are using. Can you show how to do a DIA session? You can track DIA sessions within ArchivesSpace. I think in the interest of time, I'm not going to do that here, but you do have the ability to DIA session materials within ArchivesSpace. You can do that by going, I almost did it. And I was like, in the interest of time, I almost did it. You can go to your session record and there's a DIA sessions subrecord within there that you can DIA session material. Can logins be connected to an organization directory service to manage users? I'm not sure I understand that question. Christine?
So ArchivesSpace has some built-in authentication that's pretty simple, but there's also a community plugin to do other kinds of authentication, and there is some built-in LDAP functionality as well. So yes, you can use like your own, set of logins with ArchivesSpace. It just takes a little bit of it just takes using the community plugin or using the LDAP functionality.
Thanks, Christine. They gave me a second to catch my breath and grab some water too. All right, so we're all caught up on the Q&A. I'm going to pop over to the chat to see what's going on there. Mark asks, how does ArchivesSpace handle records management, description schedules, et cetera? So ArchivesSpace isn't really a records management application in that way. Like I said, you can do things like track events within ArchivesSpace, and you can always indicate that something is scheduled for an action like that, but it isn't. It's designed specifically for more like archival management and less for records management. It also doesn't have any sort of automatic functions or reminders. Like you couldn't set a reminder that on this date, this action needs to happen, and ArchivesSpace itself will update records for you. A good example of this is like within locations, you can set a location as temporary because maybe you're having to do a move or something. So you set the location as temporary. You don't have a way within ArchivesSpace to tell it when that temporary location will revert back or change to a new location. You'd have to go in and update when that change happens itself. So again, I'd say play around with the sandbox or download the application just to see, try it out, see if it would work for you. But in terms of records management, there potentially could be better solutions out there. I don't know them off the top of my head.
I just wanted to mention that we do, I mean, Jessica's mentioned the wonderful advantages of participating in a community that has done lots of different kinds of work. Often, like if you can think of a need that you have, somebody else in the community has thought and even possibly like solved that need for themselves. So there are some places, including Dartmouth College, that have done some integrations with records management systems. So the functionality isn't built into ArchivesSpace, but people have built connections to systems that they use, like OnBase.
Thanks, Christy. All right, I think that catches us up in both the chat and the Q&A. Can't believe we kept it to an hour. I was just that What a marathon. I'm going to give everyone just another minute to see if there's any other questions that pop through. But I won't keep you here any longer than we have to. All right. Seeing none, and normally this is when they'll come in, like right when I start talking. Seeing none, thank you all so much for attending. I'm glad that you're interested in ArchivesSpace. That was a lot of information, I know. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at that email address or check out any of the links that you see on the screen. We'd be happy to talk to you about using ArchivesSpace. And there's also a lot of great resources on our YouTube channel. We have some old trainings there that may be helpful, especially around questions related to digital objects. I know that that can be a lot. But I appreciate your interest and I hope to hear from you soon. Thanks, everybody.